Jewish Museum and the Remember Me program. My name is Ronnie Bogner, and in my role as volunteer manager, I have the privilege of working with and getting to know and hearing most of our survivors' testimonies. 25 years ago now, the museum was founded by survivors, and we continue to honour their commitment to this day. In fact, the idea of this program came from survivors themselves. The Remember Me program is quite unique. Each month you can come to the museum and you will hear a different survivor testimony. Today it is a privilege for me to introduce Dasia. Dasia was born in 1938 in Rzeszow, Poland. I hope I pronounced that sort of all right. Dasia has been volunteering for really only a short time at the museum, sharing her testimony with all of the students that come in. And in that short period, she's made an enormous impact on the students, the visitors who listen to her, and the staff members. Dasia relates in her story that the only reason she survived was that she was able to pass as a Christian young girl, a Polish Christian young girl. So please welcome Dasia.
Thank you, Ronnie. It's just wonderful to see so many people here on a beautiful Sydney sunny day. I'm also aware that there are a lot of friends here who are survivors, who have a lot of background, and a number of people who are not. So there may be things I'll be saying that some of you are very familiar with. This is me at the age of 18 months at the outbreak of war. I had, I suppose, the misfortune to have been born in the wrong country at the wrong time, in Poland, which had on one side, on its western side, was Nazi Germany, on the other side was communist Soviet Union. And I was born in a part of Poland. I just want to a bit of background that just before the outbreak of war, Hitler and Stalin made a pact to divide Poland so that Germany would walk into the western part of Poland that came to be known as the General Gouvernement, whereas the eastern part came under Soviet occupation and was so for the next 2 years. The memories and the things I'll be talking about are basically based on what I remember as a 3-year-old child, unlike many of the survivors here who have memories of an adult. So part of it, I've written a book about this, and I'll be reading parts of it because I want to retain that voice of the child. I was born, my name was Hadassah Esther Kahane, and Dasia is the diminutive of Hadassah. And in the part of Poland that was on the west into which Hitler walked in a place called Rzeszow. And I hope I'm going to the right photo. They were my parents. My father was Shulim Kahane, my mother was Hannah. My father he had studied Jewish studies at the Institute of Jewish Studies in Warsaw, and that was his first job, teaching in a gymnasium, a high school, in a bilingual Polish and Hebrew in Rzeszow. This was not where the family came from. As you see, we came from the eastern part of Poland, but that was his first job, and he had newly married, and that's where I was born. In 1939, when the war broke out, a lot of people fled from the part occupied by the Nazis to the east, which was still under Russian occupation. And we went to a little place called Mikulince, which was a small town where my maternal grandparents lived. They had a flour mill. And strangely enough, I have memories from that place, and many children with my background do remember things as young as 3. And can I say that those memories are mine in that there is nobody alive who could have told me about them. And one of my early memories, my father, by the way, taught Jewish studies in Rzeszow and taught Hebrew. He was a scholar of the modern language Ivrit. One of my early memories was winter, and I was looking through the double glazed doors, windows outside where it had been snowing. We had sort of two panes and some sand in between. I was looking at the frost patterns, and I remember each of those memories is very precious. My father calling me and sitting next to him, and he was teaching me the Aleph Bet, that's the Hebrew alphabet. So we were a very education-conscious family at the age of 3. I also remember that I was told that there was a Baba Yaga, a witch which took naughty children, and I'm sure many of you have heard about Baba Yaga. And there was an old lady in town who I thought was a Baba Yaga. I was scared of her. Then there must have been April 1941, where I was already 3 1/4, and we must have been Passover, where Jewish people make the unleavened bread, that we all went to a big hall, something like this, where there were long tables, and people were rolling the square pieces to make a matzah and putting holes into them. So these are very early memories. And I'll read you the next bit. Then suddenly everything changed. It was summer, July 1941. I was 3 and a few months old, 3 1/2 years old. We heard the news that the German army was advancing. They were expected to pass through our town, Mikulince, in the next 24 hours. I didn't know what German army advancing meant, but I could feel that the grown-ups were nervous. We went to the forest to hide and wait. We had to be very quiet. Though it was night, we saw and heard the German soldiers march and drive along in big cars called tanks. I was scared, terribly frightened, of the dogs barking and of the terrifying roar of the Germans' motorcycles. Finally, they were gone. I didn't know what was happening, but in my body, I knew danger. And at that stage, my parents came back and they decided to leave Mikulince and go to a nearby town called Zbaraz, which is where my father's family came from. My grandparents, everybody lived in Zbaraz. And on that night, and I have that memory, I stayed in my clothes and I was lying on a sofa holding my doll and waiting for a horse-driven car to come and take us to Zbaraz. And we drove through the night, and there's this memory of the stars and the horses weighing and driving through the night. But the main thing was that I was being held in my father's arms. And I know, you read about refugee children and being taken away. As long as you are firmly in your parents' arms, you are safe. And we went to Zbaraz. And this is the news story, because in Zbaraz we went to live in a ghetto, and a ghetto meant the Jewish quarter, and it had been the poorest part of town. Then people from other areas were herded in, so there were a number of families living in one area. And then our ghetto or Jewish quarter was not fenced in. You could come in and out, but you needed specific permission from the local civil government saying, Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith is allowed to walk outside in the streets of Zbaraz between this time and this time. It was a very strict curfew. You had to have a reason to walk out, otherwise you would be caught. The other thing is that that time they gave us armbands, and there was a Star of David, so you were labeled, so everybody would know that you were Jewish. I was in that ghetto for about 15 months, and I never left the house. We were on the first floor. I was always inside, and apparently I used to like sweeping the floor. I actually met somebody who was 11 at the time, a boy who came to visit and said, you were always sweeping. During that time, the actions started, and I'll just explain. The German word is Aktion, action. you'd call it a killing grade, and the Polish word is akcja, which I may use because it comes naturally to me, which means that for various reasons, on different criteria, Jewish people would be told to collect in the local marketplace, and according to different criteria. The first action was to grab people who were old or disabled or people who were ill. They were taken away. And they were taken away to not far from us was the extermination camp of Belzec. There were other criteria. Able-bodied people were taken to forced labor camps or to Belzec. Each time about 600 to 1,000 people were taken away. At the beginning there were 5,000 Jewish people in Zbaraz. Now, in our room where I lived during that time, there was another family living, a man, a woman, a couple with 2 little boys. And one day they were taken away during an akcja, and he came back on his own. And he lay in the corner on a mattress and refused to eat. And I know people were trying to make him to eat, and he starved himself to death. And they took his body and put it in another room, and I and another little girl used to go lift the blanket to see what a dead body is like and poke it around. Now there must have been somebody who used to warn our family that an action was coming, that the raid was coming. And by the way, because Zbaraz was a fairly small town, the killing squad would come from the big town called Tarnopol, and I'll tell you about it in a minute. They would arrive on the particular, to carry out a particular raid, depending on the number, but they came from Tarnopol. So somebody must have, whether there was somebody in the Jewish police that was helping the Nazis, I don't know, but we knew that an action was going to happen. And we had a little step in our room, like a 4-step. Outside there was a balcony, which you could lift and you would go down into a hiding area below. It was those hiding areas, we used the word bunker, which is a German word for cellar. And I just want to read you this, my reaction, because when we went down, we would go down, and we had to be very, very quiet, because, and on top, as we could hear this stamping and shouting and throwing of the furniture about. We sat there in silence. My heart beat fast with fear. Terrible things would happen if someone made a sound. Of course, they would find us. A child started to cry. People froze. It stopped. The crying stopped. Everyone breathed out again. There was a long silence. At last, it was safe to go up. Sometimes we weren't warned enough. There was not enough warning, and we would go and lie under the bed while the people were walking around. Then one of the most terrible acts that happened, always around the 8th of November, there's a historic reason, I don't want to go into it now. Now, I know the date that on the 8th, between the 8th of November and the 30th of November, and you'll know the reason why in a minute, my parents decided that it was just not safe for me to stay with them in the ghetto, that they had to do something for me. And they decided to give me away. I often think what it's like for parents to do that, to give me away to a Polish woman called Sabina, a Christian woman, and her husband actually happened to be Jewish. And they lived in Tarnopol. And the reason that I don't know whether there was some exchange of money, how the arrangement was made. And once, and I don't remember the actual parting, what happened, but when I went away, I took my favorite toys with me, which were salt and pepper shaker and a little white ball. Now, what's interesting is that you would think Dasia is a Polish name. It's not. Everybody Polish would know it's not. It comes from Hadassah. So I had to change my name to Stasha. I was 4 years old, 4.5, and my father very clearly explained that I must never tell anybody that I was Jewish, because I was going to live as a Christian child, as an Aryan child. And I want to use the word Aryan because this was part of Nazi ideology, that you could divide it. There was a hierarchy of races. The top, the master race, was the German Nordic race called the Aryan race. And there were superior race. People like the Poles were inferior. They called the word Untermenschen, under people. And Jewish people were even lower than that. And the master race, the Aryan race, were fair, blonde, blue-eyed. And I looked like an Aryan child. If I had had dark eyes, obviously, and dark hair, I would never have been able to live as an Aryan child. So I was taken to Ternopil. And I just want to tell you a little bit about my memories from Ternopil. We lived in a first-floor apartment again in the city. And during that time, I don't remember ever being hugged. Never. I suffered a fair bit of malnutrition because Polish people eat a lot of speck, you know, the white part of pork. And I knew that I mustn't eat, so I didn't eat it. That I was Jewish, and Jewish people don't eat pork. Sabina and her husband had 2 little boys who were younger than me. They might have been 3 and 2. And they used to eat the middle of the white bread and give me the crust. And by the way, I like crust now. But occasionally when Sabina was out, her husband would make me some garlic bread, black bread rubbed with garlic. And he also tried to teach me the alphabet when she was away. But during that time, I lived a double existence that I knew, and you know, I'm a child psychologist, I knew that I was Jewish and mustn't tell. At the same time, I would said all the Christian prayers, I would cross myself, and the Poles are very Catholic people. There's a picture or a statue of Jesus in every room. I would go on my knees and cross myself and be a Christian, behave like a Christian girl, but knew I was Jewish. And I had memories that I would look out of the window, there would be a group of really very, very pale, weak-looking people being driven along the road, and I knew they were Jewish and I mustn't tell. Now, strangely enough, on the same floor as we lived, there was a woman who was a neighbor, who became friendly with Sabina, who was denounced people to the Nazis. She got some sort of goodies, obviously privileges, by finding Jews. And she was friends with Sabina, who was keeping me, her little Christian daughter. And there was one day she came in very excited, said, I found that the family downstairs are Jewish, and the SS is coming to take them away. And we actually stood, and the people came out, and I just have a memory that they were dark-haired. There was, I also had sometimes a good time when I used to go to Sabina's mother, who lived in a tiny little, very primitive village. Primitive means there was no floors, it was beaten soil. And that was out in the country where there was a stork on our house, and I saw babies, the stork brought babies. And I was a very wild child running around there. So this was me in Ternopil. And then one day, a man, I actually think, when I think about it, I don't think it was a time that I felt anything. I didn't feel hugged or I just didn't feel. And that's not unusual for children like me. Then one day, a man I did not know, but who may have been a relative, came to Ternopil. He told Sabina and her husband and me news that I heard, but didn't really understand. He said that both my parents were dead, both mother and father. How could that be? All he knew, he said, was that they had been killed and that he was to come and tell us. And Sabina wondered how it could have happened. Did they run away from the ghetto and try to hide in the forest? And what would I as a child do? I ran to find my favorite little ball, the toy that I had brought from home. And I couldn't find it. Where could it be? Now I had nothing from my home. I could not talk, and neither could I cry. I knew that I might get into trouble, and make them angry if I cried. It was better, safer to stay silent. But now what would happen to me? And we all have survival instinct, knowing who would care for me. My parents had promised to come and fetch me after the war, but now they could never come. It was so frightening. I was still a little girl. If there was nobody to hold and care for me, I might stop being alive. And I learned, and I think it's not unusual for people with my experience, to be a very good girl so I wouldn't get into trouble and that they would keep me. There was one time I have a scar here, which I know very little about, but I think it was a gland, some swollen gland, that I had to go to a hospital outside town. At that time, the hospital had no provisions. There was no cutlery, no soap. The parents would bring it, but Sabina just left me there. So I didn't have anything to wash myself with, and I didn't have any cutlery. They would bring us some sort of soup in a little bowl, and I had to slurp it. And I must tell you, even now, going to hospital is rather frightening. And what happened then is the Russians were approaching, and they conquered. They were able to push the Germans back. But during that time, we were bombed in and covered by rubble. And the Russian soldiers dug me out and dug us out. And they had obviously been told that Sabina, they took this neighbor, the Nazi sympathizer woman, away, and they had been told that Sabina was a friend of hers. So they came to her and had put a gun to her head, and she sort of grabbed me, put me in front, and said, "Here, how could I be a Nazi sympathizer? Here, I've saved a Jewish child." So suddenly it was okay to be Jewish. Pretty confusing. The area was it was rubble, but mightn't have been nice for the adults. From a child's point of view, it was fantastic hide and seek, going up and down and hiding and playing, climbing over arches. But at that time, I knew that it was okay to be Jewish, so I knew that. And I had forgotten my name. It was Hadassah Dasia. So I used to sit with another little girl sort of in the ruins there, and we used to try out different names to remember what my real name was. Let's have a sip of water. And Sabina obviously wanted to return me to somebody, so they went back to Zbaraz and found out that there was family of my father's alive, had survived. There were Gusta and Velo. They were actually my father's cousins, but I referred to them as auntie and uncle, Auntie Gusta and Uncle Velo. And they came to the house where they lived, but they weren't there. There was a woman who was doing some sewing, and they sort of left me there. I don't know, I now think they may have left a piece of paper with some details, because I suppose you can recognize your cousin's child, but my auntie and uncle knew my birthday, so I've never asked them the question. So when Gusta came back, they saw this little girl lying on the floor picking bits of material, and they were going to send me to an orphanage because they were very poor and they wanted to feed me up, but I apparently screamed and hollered and it kept me. I had suffered severe malnutrition, so every bit of me was covered with sores, styes, every bit of me. It's amazing that I've got any skin at all. I had lice, and they shaved me 3 times. I used to run at the marketplace with a little red hanky. And during that time, Velo and Gusta, he had kidney problems. They had survived by hiding, by the way. They had to go to Ternopil for medical treatment, so they gave me to his sister, Bello's two sisters, to look after. And I had a good time with them because they lived by the river and they used to bake bread rolls illegally. And I ran around and nobody stopped me doing. I went to school there. And of course, you may know that the border moved west, so that part of Poland became part of the Soviet Union. It was actually eventually became the Ukraine. So my first year of schooling, I was 6 years old, was in Russian, and we had a picture of Stalin, our father Stalin, decorated with flowers in our classroom. And the 1st of May, I used to walk around with a little navy skirt and a white blouse and a red flag to celebrate. When Gusta and Velo came back to fetch me, I didn't want to go back. They had a fight. The aunties had got fond of me and they were sort of pulling me. And the decision was made that I would stay with them for a while, because what was happening is the population, this was now part of the Soviet Union, the Polish population was being evacuated in cattle trucks. We went west, in fact, to a part that had been part of Germany, became Poland. So I stayed with them, and eventually the arrangement was that I would go back to my auntie and uncle when we got to west to a place called Bytom. And they made me, had a little dress made for me on arrival. And of course, new dress, I went to the people who gave me new dress. And it was very cheap too. So I just want to show you that. This is a fairly frightened, in my look, a very frightened little girl. That's me at the age of 6 to 7, when I went and was given to a new lot of people. But as I said, it's wearing a little red and white dress. And we stayed there. I don't actually remember going to school. If we did, it didn't make much of an impression. But what happened at the time is that amazing as it is, in Poland in 1946 there was a pogrom, an attack on Jews in a place called Kielce. And because, by the way, my uncle got a very good job. He was a lawyer. He was head of the legal department for mining in this place, Bytom. We could have stayed there, but what happened is that over 40 Jews were attacked when a Polish 8-year-old claimed he had been kidnapped by Jews and kept in a cellar. And Gusta came back from shopping and she heard people say, "Isn't it good that they're killing Jews again? A pity Hitler had not finished them off." So the decision was to get out of communist Poland. It was communist Poland. And we fled borders. We fled from Czechoslovakia, to finished off in the West American zone of Germany. As you may know, Germany was divided into zones by the Allies, American, British, French, and Russian, that became East Germany. And we went in Stuttgart. I went to a DP camp. Now, the DP camp was an area probably the size of the Pitt Street Mall, where the buildings had been evacuated by the German people who lived there. Presumably they were compensated and given to the Jews who came. Now, DP, displaced persons, meant we were not citizens of any country. We didn't actually live in that area. We lived outside because it was full, in a distance away. And this, I'm always inspired by what happened in that period. We were there from 46, 47 to 51, because this DP camp was initially organized by UNRWA, the United Nations Refugee Relief Organization. But very soon the Jewish community, the Jewish people are very good at community building. They set up a day school, a Jewish school. They set up a little hospital. There was a newspaper. There was a cultural center. And I had and they didn't have teachers, but anybody who was educated became a teacher. My uncle took on the job of teaching mathematics. I mean, he was a lawyer. And what was wonderful is that a lot of the children were orphans or half orphans. So being an orphan was quite a normal thing to do. And it was wonderful to be able to be Jewish without having to hide. And in 1948, when I was 10 years old, my auntie and uncle decided to adopt me as their daughter. So I stopped being Kahani and became Gassenbauer. And they wanted me to call them mommy and daddy. But I knew they were not my mommy and daddy, and I refused. However, they paid me every time I said mommy and daddy, so that worked. And it's a very strange thing when I think about those, that we lived very isolated. You know, there was a Jewish community, and I can imagine a lot of ethnic communities coming, and we lived in a way in a capsule. But by 1950, people were migrating. Everybody wanted to go to the United States, then Canada or Australia. And there weren't enough Jewish children to sustain a school. So my new parents decided to put me I went to a German high school. My first year of schooling was a German high school, where I was the only Jewish child among 1,000 girls. And a wonderful principal there. And we were planning to go to Israel, because the state of Israel was established, but my father had kidney problems, and we thought it would be too hard. In fact, he died 7 years after arrival in Australia, so we could have gone there. I just don't want to spend too much time, but I came here at the age of 12 and a half, and a good friend of mine, Susie, is here, when we met in that school at that time. You know, people think, oh, it must have been wonderful arriving and being here. No, it was very, very hard, because in Stuttgart, I was among my equals, among my people. Here, my name was, when I enrolled at school, I enrolled under the name of Hadassah. And they said no. And my surname was Gassenbauer. They said, that's not a name, that's a short story, you've got to change it. So I took the first part, Hedda. There's a story behind it, don't have that much time, and I changed that, so I took Hedda, I called myself Hedda. I had long plaids, waist-long plaids. They had to be chopped off. So I lost my name. I lost my name. I lost my plaids, and also when we were in Germany, I had a German teacher teaching me English with a German accent. So I was a foreigner here for a long time, and of course my parents were very education conscious. So that I arrived with an accent. I want to say that I just want to move on. I went on to university, and I became an academic. My area was child psychology and development of racist attitudes in children. And I had children, and I've got 5 grandchildren, one of whom is here today. But around the age, I think about 10 years ago, I was approached by a professor from British Columbia who was editing a book called Light from the Ashes, and he wanted to know. He asked people who worked in the social sciences, mainly in the United States, to reflect on their lives and to see what was the impact of their experiences, both personally and professionally. And I thought it was quite a challenging thing to do. And I just want to read you a little bit on that. The obvious thing for me in terms of person was hiding my name, hiding my identity was natural for me. For me to actually stand up even and say I'm Jewish was very, very difficult. I mean, I would break out in a sweat. You know, people don't realize no matter what you do, your body remembers everything, so your body knows. And rightly so. I mean, to me, all these stories are keep quiet, keep quiet. And I want to tell you that I met at a conference, I met a woman who was talking, a Polish woman born in London. But she said she had visited her sister in Poland, and she said the level of anti-Semitism had persisted, that her little nephews came in and they sort of were pulling their noses, says, "Oh, we are Jewish," because it was pulling their noses. So I was interested in talking to her, and I met her, and I said, "Can we make time to have coffee?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "My name is Dasia." I said, "It's not a Polish name," and I said it in Polish. And she said, "Oh, I know that. I know that." And I said, in Polish, "Ja jestem Żydówka," means I am a Jewess. And she's, we made time for the next day to meet for coffee. I was with a friend, and I actually nearly passed out. I broke out in a sweat. I sat down, and she had to calm me down. It was very frightening. So I didn't know why. And the next day when I met her, when I said the word Żydówka, what connotation has it got for you? She said, "There's no worse word in the Polish language." So I had said something which was very hard. And if I have the time, I just waste my timekeeper. I'd like to read you something that happened, which for me was probably one of the most biggest, well, in terms of the book, Light from the Ashes, certainly there have been positives. I have worked with children. I have a very good empathy for children. But my area has been combating racism, working out strategies for schools. This has been my passion, even though I don't think I ever made a conscious decision, but each time I did it. But in terms of hiding, my first job while I was still doing my degree was at a Catholic high school, wonderful school, where I was teaching history. And by the way, I met my cousin in Israel, and who had escaped from Zbaraz, had survived in Siberia. And he had in his possession an essay by my father that he had written for some exam. The two families had shared a house together. He had no memory of it. And it turned out that my father majored in history. I majored in history and psychology, so whether it was genetic or not. Anyhow, we were told what was happening in the school, that the cardinal was coming to visit. And the school was in a U-shape. There was a playground and a U-shape around here. And we teachers were on the first floor, the side, with 1,000 girls in front of us. And the cardinal was going to come along the row of teachers up on the first floor. And we were expected to kneel down and kiss his ring. 1,000 people in front, lying there. Now, all those kids were looking up at us. And we, as I said, I'll read this to you because I get too emotional. We were told we should kneel and kiss the ring on his proffered hand. When he entered, all the students knelt down. So did the teachers, everybody. And when he reached each of them, each dutifully kissed his ring. With my whole being, I knew that I was not going to kneel to anybody or kiss their ring. I no longer had to. As he came closer, I could feel my heart beating fast. I broke into sweat and I went red in the face. There he was in front of me, with his bejeweled hand extended to be kissed. I remained standing very upright, extended my hand towards his and shook it. I was the only one standing, visible to all. He wasn't worried about his face. He moved on to the next person, unfazed. I knew I had shown courage, but it was so hard to announce to the world that I was not one of them, that I was a Jew. At the end of that day, I went home, got into bed, covered myself with a blanket, and stayed curled up for hours. I could not stop shaking. I can do it now. Now, I want to move on to say something to really, that's the heart of the matter, is that when my father, as I said, decided, and I think it was after the 8th of November 1942, the terrible Akcja, decided to give me away to Sabina, he wrote a letter in Hebrew and sent that letter went to my American family in Pittsburgh. After the war, the American family traced me, and I got that letter. I'll read it to you, but and then perhaps I'll tell you now. It was written on 2 yellow bits of paper, and people are very puzzled, scholars, how it got, because it was censored, how it got from that ghetto in Zbaraz ghetto to Pittsburgh, United States. And that letter is now deposited in the Yad Vashem, the memorial for the murdered Jews in Jerusalem. So I'm reading, they send me the original plus an English translation that I've had retranslated, it's more accurate. Now that letter was written on the 30th of November 42. The Akcja was on the 8th of November. You can see from the letter that it was written soon after I was given away. So my reckoning is that it happened, I was given away somewhere during those days. Our dear relatives in America, we would need the pen of Job if we attempted to describe a small portion of the bitterness and sorrow of our lives. It seems to me that it's not within the power of a human being to describe to anybody or to himself what we are feeling, and this is neither the place nor the time to elaborate on that matter. By the way, my father was a modern observant Jew, and there are a lot of sort of expressions here which indicate that he was a devout Jew. On the 19th of July, 1942, my father, my teacher, Menachem Mendel, a man without peers, passed away. May I be the atonement of his resting. I doubt if any of the family of my aunt, Chaya Weiner from Laft, is among the living, and it's possible that my daughter and myself are the sole surviving children of my grandfather Solomon of Podkamien. It is my fervent hope that God, may he be blessed, will help us to go forth from slavery to freedom. However, I must be realistic, and I see that we are standing on the verge of destruction. I'm compelled to hide my precious tender shoot, my little daughter, may she live until the storm passes. It's difficult for me to describe the sorrow and pain that gnaw at my heart when I see that my bright little daughter cannot understand why she is being taken away from the arms of her parents. It is my strong hope that I and my wife will yet be privileged to bring her up, but it's possible in time that you, my uncles, will be the saviors and redeemers of my bloodline and the sole surviving relatives of my child on the side of the Brown family, that's his father's family. And then you take my daughter from the Gentile family to whom I've given her and bring her up as the daughter of Israel, loyal to her Torah and to her people. And she should know that it is my desire that she should build her life in the land of Israel. Of course, Israel didn't happen for another few years, because who as well as we know that we live on the edge of a volcano in all the lands of exile. My daughter was born on the 7th of Adar, the Hebrew date, and they'll give you the 8th of February 38, according to secular calendar, in Rzeszow, and her name is Esther Hadassah, after my mother. And I hope that my daughter be privileged in the same way as were my forefather, the Grand Rabbi Yehuda Levi Maharal, was a great Rebbe of Prague, and his forebears, to survive the evil decrees and be witness to the raising of the lot of Israel. Please, I also ask you to take an interest in the Gentile family who took it upon themselves to conceal my daughter. As I said, I have a strong hope that my wife and I will raise our daughter ourselves I would be privileged to see you with happy hearts. In July of last year, we had used that my Aunt Chaya and my father sent her some of money, but from that time we have not heard from her. I'm finishing my letter, and I and my daughter wish you peace and everything good. My daughter can be recognized, her ears were not of equal size. Your nephew, Shulam. Now, then there was a postscript, and that's really, to me, one of the most important things. The postscript had only the Hebrew calendar, whereas the main letter had the Hebrew calendar and the 30th November 42. The postscript had only the Hebrew calendar. I always assumed, without looking too carefully, that that was written, on the same day, which was the postscript. But when I started researching as an adult what was happening, had happened in Zbaraz, I found out that the liquidation, which meant the killing of the rest of the Jews, happened between the 6th and the 8th of June, 1943. And I, just to tell you that at the beginning, as I said, there were 5,000 Jews in Zbaraz. At the end, there were 60. I'm one of the 60, just about 1%. So that was, and some people may have fled those 60 into the forest, but that was the end. So it was the 6th to 8th of June 6th to 8th was the liquidation, and then the place was declared Judenfrei, free of Jews. And my friend Dalia, who is here, Dasia Black-Gutman, who really is a scholar, and she had the calendar for the Hebrew date. I ring her up, I say, Dalia, the letter here says Rosh Chodesh, Sivan, gave her the date. What secular date was it? It was the first time it occurred to me that it wasn't written in 42. And she said it was the 4th of June, 2 days before the liquidation, rose the postscript. When I looked at the postscript, it's quite different writing. It's a scroll, it's hastened, it's completely different. The other letter is in main letters. It was a scroll. And 2 days before. So I'll read you that. Now it is known to me that my aunts Rebecca and Chaya and all her family were undoubtedly killed on the 24th of August 1942, which was one of the really bad actions, raids. With reference to my daughter, I again repeat my plea as above, and just as I participate in the grief of my community, so may God permit us to see the redemption and comfort of the whole community of Israel. Greetings, Shulam. I just want to add something to that. When the family in America had sent me the original, I made this terrible mistake because it was some of the lines were disappearing, of putting sticky tape on it. So if you see in my book, there's a scan of the book of this line. Of course, sticky tape has acid and eats up lines. So the people at Yad Vashem thought they'll do the best to restore it. But the other thing is that before I gave it in, my cousin in Israel, or my father's cousin in Israel, said, let me have the letter retranslated, because the letter that I had translated was what the American family had done, and we weren't quite sure. He said, perhaps there are things we can pick up, some lines that may have been left out. And in fact, there were a lot of lines. The various sort of religious annotations were not there. But to me, there was one line that hadn't been there and appeared, and that's the reference, I am compelled to hide my precious tender shoe, or infant branch. We try to find the right translation. And to me, it's been the most magnificent thing, because it had so much love in it. So that line was not there, and it was recovered in their translation. So I think I'll finish on that note.
I always find it hard to talk after these talks. I get very emotional. Dasia, you spoke so magnificently and gave us an insight into a child's world in a time like that. And I sat at the back thinking, imagine if this was our children or our grandchildren. You know, how does a child go through something like that and land up such a beautiful, eloquent, well-spoken lady? It's just magnificent. And the survivors that we have at the museum who give of their time to talk to the students that come through, for that experience is something that lives with them forever, because meeting a survivor is far different than reading history from a history book. And I'm sure you all left with that same feeling today. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces who come to our Remember Me's every month, the third Sunday of every month, and also to see so many new people. We welcome you to the museum. We want you to feel part of our family, as we call it, become a member of the museum. Our main exhibition is under renovation at the moment, and our brand new, very exciting museum will hopefully open by the end of November. I think Dasia deserves a big round of applause for her magnificent talk. And I always at this point ask the other Holocaust survivors in the audience to stand up, because I think we can never honor them enough. So let's just give you all a round of applause today too. We thank you for your dedication to the museum. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we finish off. We've got half an hour before we've got a book launch at 3:30, which I invite you to attend. I think it's going to be something far more light-hearted. A gentleman by the name of Rob Wills has written a book about an early Jewish settler. He was a convict sent from England, and he became the wandering, singing Jew. It's a true story. It's very comically and beautifully written. It gives us an insight into early Australia. That book launch will be taking place at 3:30 p.m. So if you'd like to visit our cafe on the first floor, have a cup of coffee and come back, we'd love to have you attend. We also have Professor Berenbaum, who's an internationally acclaimed scholar. He'll be talking at our museum next Thursday evening at 6:30 p.m. and his title is The Sonderkommando. And I invite you to attend then too. I want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you again, Dasia, for your wonderfully executed talk. And hopefully we hope to see you all again very soon. Thank you so much for being here today. What I inadvertently forgot to mention is that Dasia has written a book, and the book is available at the bookstore. So if anybody does want to buy Dasia's book, it's at the bookstore.
Very strong of you to say what you did, and I felt a lot of parallels because I was always a rebel. I wouldn't tell everyone. I took my yards to the camp. I used to make silly faces behind them. My nickname was Rzeszow.
I'll speak to you.
collect people because there's so much information that hasn't been written and investigated.
No, I would really like to find that. Also because my mother converted to Judaism for my father. She wanted my
And where did she convert? Where?
where she converted to temple in
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it wouldn't have been Rabbi Ken, she's too young.
No, but earlier.
Yeah.
So, where will the street be? Yeah. I'll just jump in and see what.
Okay. If not, one of two things, pull the stage forward or
Yeah.
talk from there with the video.
Which do you think would be most effective?
I think it's easier for people to see you
I think so
sound
too.
elevated.
Yep, I agree. So if we can pull the stage forward a bit and then.
Daniel, don't do it. Don't do it. It's much younger and stronger than yours.
I was thinking how, if I get as far as 40 minutes, just wave at me, that really good stuff.
Yeah.
Tell her about the BJ. She can ring me if she wants. If she wants. How would that be? Something as on the phone.
Just pull the stage.
I make it work for you then.
Is that good for you?
Yep, that's beautiful. That will work well.
Got the,
Yeah, the clicker.
the clicker.
So which I
Just
assume.
move it forward, just the arrow pointing to the right.
Yep.
I'm going to change the batteries in here because we just had an hour's talk, so I'll put fresh batteries in.
Mm-hmm.
All good? You've done some work?
Yes, please. Yep. Hello, hello. Oh, that works.
there we go. There's obviously a loose wire or something. So you just need it there. It picks up really loudly from there.
Good. And just to, do I point it
You
at
don't
the
have to
picture?
do anything. You literally just, it's, is it moved?
It did?
Yep. So it's,
Yep.
picks it up really well.
Good.
Yep.
That's beautiful.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just do a brief introduction
Yep.
and then
Yep.
I'll call you up.
Good. I'll wear
Just
head
give people
tie.
another 15 or 20 minutes to get themselves
Sure.
together. Great.
That's great.